In the great and immortal words of legendary caddy Chubb Patterson, it's all in the hips. And today, we're not only going to show you why that's such a strong case in skateboarding, but we're going to give you a program to start taking your hips from budget to buttery and beyond.
Front salad, back salad, front blunt.
What's going on, guys? Danny from Skateboard Strength, and I help skaters from all across the globe fine-tune their bodies to get maximum performance both on and off the board. And today, we're talking all about them hips. I think a great place to start is with the education around the roles of the hips in skateboarding. This is not just because I want to yap on and bore you to tears, but because I truly believe that education is the key to not only understanding what you are doing and why, but also to help speed up results. If, however, you don't want to hear me self-indulgently say big words and flex my years of experience, you can simply fast forward and skip to the program right now. Hold on, come back. I promise this will be quick, educational, and save you a ton of time and frustration in the long run. Just stay with me here. When the hips are sore and achy, it can make you feel old beyond your years. In terms of skate performance, they are a hub of skate-based movement, and their health can be the difference between movements feeling smooth and efficient or achy and restricted. To get an idea of why the hips get so overly tight and restricted in skating, we must first understand their role and how it plays in to skate-based movements. Two of the biggest taxes in hip health and function in skating comes from their roles in absorbing impact and forces, as well as their overuse and abuse in their role of sliding our feet up and out to perform tricks. Now, these are normal things that strong and healthy hips should be able to handle. However, the issues tend to arise when they are pushed beyond their limits in amount of force and impact, or simply exposed to a greater volume of work they are not ready for. This in turn causes the hips to tighten up and work through a restricted range of motion, which can have a knock-on effect in performance and injury further up and down the chain. Here is two examples. When landing our tricks, if the hips jam up and aren't allowed to go back and then down, it forces our spine to excessively cave as a means of accepting load. This forces the spine to work beyond what is needed if the hips were just able to fulfill their role and share the load. As we look down the chain, if the hips lock up as we accept load, the knees will be severely forced in as a means of accepting that impact. This can do two things: provide unnecessary strain on the knees, which can lead to irritation over time, and two, compress the front of the hip, which can lead to that hip pinch feeling at the front over time. When the front of the hips are tight, they actually roll us into this anterior tilted position, which puts the lower back in a vulnerable position to accept load when we take an impact, and also can lead to irritation from day-to-day things over time. Not only this, it robs the powerhouses of the hips, the glutes, from fulfilling their role to extend the hip forward, often just resulting in this cheating of sorts for people trying to use their lower spine. So that's the injury side of things. Let's now look at performance. When the hips are strong and mobile, they allow us to reach deeper positions of hip flexion and external rotation, and put the glutes and the hips in a more advantageous position to lengthen as a means of accepting impact and load. This deeper position also gives our hips a greater runway for force production in order to produce our pop, as opposed to this shortened range of motion, which doesn't give us much at all. Post-pop phase, it's the role of the hip flexors to drive the knees high and out of the way of the moving board in order to create that pop height. The hips' mobility, strength, and power also play a very underrated role in flick and tricks in general. When we think about flick, skaters tend to overly obsess about the power coming from the foot. What's often missed is the hip's ability to go from an externally to an internally rotated position is what generates all the force and power for the foot to simply come at the end and steal the glory. With simple tricks like an ollie, they allow us to create much needed stees, or as we open up into rotational tricks like frontside flips, it's again our movement from our hip that allows us to come in and generate the kind of power that simply has us finishing off our tricks with stees and ease. With just a few of these examples, we can begin to see the complexity of issues that can arise at the hips due to skating. What we can also see is how all of these issues tend to interrelate. And herein lies the two biggest mistakes we tend to see skaters make when trying to fix their hip issues: hyper-focusing on their problem area and not taking into account that it is the hips in their entirety that is contributing to their issues. We need all the muscles that support the hip, front, back, side to side, to fulfill their roles in order to not only solve hip-based pain, but also maximize performance. Added to this, we need to prep the hips for the type of dynamic loading they are going to receive when skating once they are healthy. And this is what we aim to do with this program, to finally help your skate-based hip issues for good. Before we do, if you like this program, it's just a sample of the much more in-depth hip program you receive in the Skateboard Strength app that comes with full video demo breakdown of each individual exercise, as well as ongoing support. Be sure to check it out, link in the description. Now let's crack into it. First order of operation is to restore range of motion at the hips in order to undo tightness and set the stage for the exploration of stability and strength work to come. Here, we're going to pair a glute stretch to open up space at the back and lateral hip before exploring that range with these 90-90s. Next, we are tackling the front of the hip with this couch stretch before taking that hip through its new range with these rock backs. Once we have gained mobility, we now need to explore stability at these newfound ranges. Before we unleash the powerhouses of the hips, we want to make sure the muscles responsible for stabilizing them are ready for that type of loading. This is what the stability exercises are all about. For this, we're going to use a side bridge to stabilize the lateral hip. The Copenhagen will strengthen the adductors or inner groin muscles of the hips. This is a big one for groin pain sufferers, but make sure you ease in when trying this for the first time. The hip flexor march is to strengthen the muscles that stabilize the front, and as mentioned in our examples, play a massive role in producing pop height. And finally, we tie it all together with this hip aeroplane, which allows us to challenge hip stability through full range of motion relative to your ability to stabilize from the ground on up. Our main goal with the strength exercises is to awaken the giants of not just the hips, but also all lower body movement, the glutes. In particular, we want to train them to be strong to fulfill their role in hip extension to aid us with power and pop, but also to be able to handle eccentric load in order to absorb impact and force more efficiently, as discussed in our examples. Choose one hinge variation that suits your level for the required reps and sets. After you've explored loading that exercise and when you're able to complete this with ease, cycle to the next variation for a harder challenge. Finally, the part that most people miss when rehabbing or strengthening the hips for skating is exposing them to the kind of dynamic loading they will receive when skating. Failure to do so usually just ends with an excessive tightening of the hips and the skater going back to square one shortly after they return. This is why we build capacity to do so with these variations.
You can either complain or you can skate.
And that's it. You now have a program that not only has months of progressions once you start adding load, but also takes the time to step back and strengthen the hips as a whole to get them to the point to be able to sustain life on the plank. And most importantly, allows you to stop wasting time with all these subpar programs. Do this program 3 to 4 times a week, leaving out the impact section until your hips are ready for that type of loading. Ensure you're consistent, and in no time, you'll find your hips going from budget to buttery and beyond.